Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture on restoring a database table schema only. So in this lecture, we're going to learn how to restore a database, but with only the table schema. And the table schema is the table names and the data types that belong in that table, but doesn't actually contain any data. So this is actually a really common task that you should know well, and the reason for that being is if you ever find yourself needing in a real world situation to put the database schema somewhere else, you don't want to actually copy over the data, either because you're going to be filling it out with new data or because you have privacy concerns where the information in that data in your original database is private. And if you're going to copy that database schema over to a development server, you don't actually want to copy private user information into your new database. So that's why this is actually such a common task, and pgadmin is actually going to make it really easy. So let's go ahead and jump to pgadmin now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by opening up pgadmin. Okay, so here I am at the pgadmin terminal, or window if you will, and you'll notice I right now have 3 databases given the previous stuff that we set up. I'm going to show you 2 things and 2 different ways that you could do this sort of restore. One is to restore it into a database that already has the data. So if I go ahead and expand DVD rental, schemas public, you'll notice that I have the 15 tables, and if I were to click on one of these individual tables and look over at rows, it estimates that there's about 200 rows there. So there is actual data in this. And if you double click this, you can then begin to explore the columns, etc. So this table, this database of DVD rental has all the tables and it has all the data. So keep that in mind. Something I'm going to do first is create a new database. So I can do that either through the command line or simply by right-clicking on databases and saying new database. And I will name this database, let's just say only schema. I will say OK. Let it go ahead and create that database. All right, so now I have my only schema database. And you notice if I check the public schemas, I don't have any tables here. So what I'm going to do is to take full advantage of pgadmin here and right-click and say restore. So this whole process should look familiar to you, since this was the first way when we restored and created a full database. I have my format equal to custom or tar, and I have my file name, which is that dvdrental.tar file. So here's the link to where my file is. Go ahead and make sure the file path to where yours is correct, or you can click on these 3 dots to continue exploring. So the caveat here being, I don't actually want to copy the entire data set, I just want to copy the table schema. So how do I do that? I can go to Restore Options, number 1, and you'll see here under Type of Objects, it'll say Only Schema. And that's exactly what I want to do. So I want to make sure I click that so I don't actually take in any of that data. And if I click Restore and wait a little bit while it works, you'll notice it says process return Xcode 0, meaning everything worked out. And if I click Done, we should hopefully, if we make sure we refresh this so that everything looks good, you'll see I have tables here. So under my only schema database, I was able to restore those tables. And let's make sure it actually worked by selecting the actor table. And now you'll notice I have 0 rows. So I've copied and restored all the table schema, including the columns of the types that it's expecting, but the actual data is no longer there. So it has no rows of data. It just has the table schema that it expects. Okay, so that's how you would do that if you were creating a new database for that table schema only restore. Now let's say I wanted to restore it onto an existing database that already had the data. So for example, my DVD rental database here, if I go to tables, remember if I check actor, it already has 200 rows of that data. So how could I restore this database so that it only has the schema? Essentially just get rid of all that data, but keep the table schema. Well, I can do that in a really similar manner. I right-click DVD rental, click restore, wait for it to load. I'm going to restore it again from that .tar file, Under restore options number 1, I'm going to say only schema. And this is where you have to remember the additional step if your database still contains data. You're going to go to restore options number 2, and what you're going to do is say clean before restore. And that's essentially just going to clean away any data that is currently in that database before you restore it. That way you don't accidentally retain the data and you only pass in the data schema, or the table schema, excuse me. So let's go ahead and restore this and make sure it all worked. Go ahead and give it some time. Looks like it finished, so I'm going to select done. And now if I go ahead and refresh this, DVD rental, I go to my tables, I have all of them, and if I check actor, now you notice that the DVD rental database that previously had all the data is now just containing that table schema, so that relationship of all the tables and the columns it's expecting, with none of the actual rows of data. All right, perfect. So that's how you can restore a database with just the table schema and no data along with it. All right, everyone. Thanks, and I will see you at the next lecture.